Hey, everybody. Very happy that Anthony and friends invited me. In an event like this, we're often thinking about the immediate use case of Bitcoin as a savings technology, and I think we all know that it's very good at that. It's been the best performing asset in the world since it was created, and I think we can expect in an environment of increasing deplatforming and devaluation around the world that Bitcoin will continue to grow in value. But a lot of people don't realize there's other use cases for Bitcoin. And, you still have people who are going to be here in a few days, central bankers, the Fed, talking about how Bitcoin is pretty much useless. They consider savings speculation or hoarding. So, they don't see any use case for Bitcoin beyond that. And you've got Neil Kashkari from the Fed. You've got prestigious establishment media all around the world saying for 10 years now that Bitcoin is useless or dangerous or only for criminals or bad for the planet. This is just repeated over and over and over and over again in front of, billions of people. So people have been gaslit into thinking that this thing is not good for them or not good for the planet. And this is just so profoundly wrong. And the evidence is so massive that Bitcoin is a really amazing humanitarian and human technology, and a technology that's going to increase our ability to live harmoniously with the planet. The evidence is mounting so high, but they don't see it. So it's something I deal with every day as a human rights activist. By long introduction, my name is Alex, and I work at the Human Rights Foundation. I've been doing human rights longer than Bitcoin has existed, so I came from that world first. And over time, we just saw the power of a currency that wasn't controlled by governments, very simply. We saw WikiLeaks begin to use it when the most powerful government in the world didn't want them to receive donations. And guess what? They were able to receive donations. We saw Ukrainian protesters in 2013 start to use Bitcoin. They reached out to us. They said, could you help us? Our government has frozen our bank accounts. We were a little skeptical. Bitcoin was very different. Some people here, I see Bill here in the front row, they were around then, but Bitcoin was weird back then. And we were like, what is going on here with this thing? But you know what? We were open-minded and we did it, and it worked and got the money to people, even though their government didn't want them to get money. So we kept staring at it. And in fact, Bill was one of the people who kind of really sat me down and said, you need to, bring the Bitcoin community together with the human rights community. So we started doing this in 2017. And, that was obviously a huge year for Bitcoin in the wider industry. But it was also a big year for us as we started to understand what could be possible. Let's go back 20, 30 years. Governments didn't really have the ability to micro control people's finances. We didn't have anything like we do today with AI algorithms. I mean, a lot of people just didn't even use digital money, period. So there was no way to sort of control people's spending and habits at a micro level. Fast forward to today, the very first thing a dictator does when they don't like you is they freeze your bank account. So, all money is political, and the politicization of money has become very dangerous for many people around the world. I think we're worried about it here in America and in, Europe fairly, but for people who live under tyranny, which is 5.8 billion people, it's a much, much bigger concern. So, even though Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and the Fed and the Atlantic and the New York Times are telling you that this thing is useless, I wanted to run through three quick areas where it's profoundly useful. And the first one is commerce, really financial inclusion. You got to understand that, most people don't have it as easy as us. So only about 1 billion people have the privilege, this financial privilege we have, most of us here at least, of being born in a place that has a reserve currency, meaning other central banks want to stack it, want to hold it, and property rights, meaning free speech, rule of law, property rights, etc. So the other 7 billion people live either under a terrible currency, something that's collapsing, and they have no way to sort of access the global markets, or they live under a dictatorship. So that's the overwhelming reality for most people in the world. Money sucks. It's a problem. It's hard to move. It's hard to send. Plenty of you have dealt with this with family, friends. We've got billions of people trapped in these essentially casino token currencies. They're totally worthless outside their country. If you leave Togo with the French colonial franc and you go to Atlanta, it's useless. It's worth zero. And we're very privileged because we can take dollars anywhere. Most people don't have that privilege. And, you've got hyperinflation. You've got 2 billion people without ID. You've got way more than that who are underbanked. And again, you've got 5.7 billion people living under some kind of authoritarianism. The other thing that you have to understand about the world trading system and economy at large is there's something called I like to call the big squeeze. And it's sad, but what happens is poorer nations, in order to pay back their debt, they have to agree with big entities like the IMF and others to do something called currency devaluation. And it's happening right now in big countries like Nigeria, 200 million people, Egypt, 100 million people. What happens is essentially in order to get a loan to keep paying off the debt that they've incurred, usually not democratically, they do what's called a currency devaluation. And they devalue the currency against the dollar, in some cases in extreme ways. Last year, I visited Malawi a few weeks after that country had endured a 44% currency devaluation. And this is just normal for people all around the world. And those people don't need a 44% currency devaluation, I can tell you. Their average income is about $100 a year, so it's not something they really need, but this is something that people are subjected to all around the world. So Bitcoin is an escape for anybody. It's a way for people to get into a global monetary language that's accepted pretty much everywhere in terms of there's Bitcoin communities in every country, right? There's ways to trade fiat for Bitcoin. There's ways to use peer-to-peer networks to do that. You can do it in person, and this is on the rise. 10 years ago, maybe Bitcoin wasn't as useful. Today, it is. It's surprisingly exchangeable. It's a way to get the real exchange rate. It's a way to have private property. And I think Bitcoin's real superpower is that it can't discriminate. It doesn't know who you are. It doesn't care if you're what your gender is or your wealth or where you're from, what your passport is. It just doesn't care. There was a joke on sort of FinTwit the other day on financial Twitter that, Bitcoin recently is just sort of tracing the stock market. And obviously, if you look, zoom out, it's not. It's going to blow away the rest of the stock market over time. But even if it were for a second, that would be amazing. Most people on Earth can't access the stock market. Are you kidding? The average financial technology on Earth that people use to save is cattle or sheet metal. The idea that anybody can access something that's tracing the stock market is totally revolutionary, and yet people are laughing it off because they don't understand, the real lived reality that most people have on our planet. So again, governments are increasingly not only squeezing people and closing them off from world markets, but also going after their opponents and freezing the bank accounts of people they don't like. Bitcoin is money that dictators can't stop, very simply. So whether it's in Russia or Nigeria or Gaza or Ukraine or Afghanistan, or even in Canada during the trucker movement, when there's governments that want to freeze or stop people, the first thing they do is they try to disable their activity, but by ending their ability to pay their employees and receive donations and receive funding. And with Bitcoin, we can get around that. And at the Human Rights Foundation, we've been doing a ton of training in this area. And I can tell you that the world's largest groups in this space, humanitarian groups, human rights groups, are starting to integrate Bitcoin. And stablecoins, absolutely, to an extent. But, the way we start is with Bitcoin, and it's happening. They're not going to put it on their front page every time. But I can tell you that when you want to make a grant, if anyone's ever here tried to make a wire transfer, making a grant to Egypt using the fiat system is a disaster. So you're trying to support a journalist in Egypt. Well, if they receive a wire from you, the Egyptian government sees Human Rights Foundation or the United Nations or something in big letters. Okay, so they're going to get called in at best for questioning. At worst, they're going to get arrested. With Bitcoin, the regime has no freaking idea what's going on. It's such an obviously better way to make a wire, to make a donation. So, the truth is that Bitcoin is out there every day helping people in very difficult scenarios that no alphabet soup organization is able to get into. There's no one else helping in some of these places where Bitcoin is acting as a lifeline, and yet you've got all these talking heads saying it's useless. It's crazy. There's been no global initiative ever to help people who have bad money get better money. The Red Cross isn't doing it. The UN's not doing it. But Bitcoin is doing it. It's pretty amazing. The last thing I wanted to end on is energy. This is really important, and you've heard some commentary on this. Civilization is all about our ability to increase our energy per capita. You don't want to live, if you look at a chart of energy consumption per capita this way and prosperity this way in terms of income. You don't want to live down here. You want to live up here. It's a question of what kind of energy. Of course, we want to look at more sustainable ways, but the answer is to use more. This idea that we have to use less is a lie. And the thing about Bitcoin is that it's energy savings technology. You see these headlines in the BBC or The Economist. It's like, Bitcoin consumes as much energy as Argentina. What if you replace the word consume with saves? Bitcoin saves as much energy as Argentina. And I can tell you it's the truth. I've sat there on a lake in Kenya. I've watched a water pump that's taking beautifully clean, consistent geothermal power and powering the country's biggest industry. They're the number one exporter of flowers in the world. And they're taking this power and they're pumping water up to a field to grow flowers to sell to Europe. And that there's no grid there, right? So that pump is not on all the time. So whenever it's not on, there's just waste. There's waste everywhere. And yet I look to my left and there's a shack with a Starlink on it, and it's the Bitcoin network buying 100% of whatever power is not used. And you can start to understand this is going to completely change energy markets and our relationship with energy. I think that, the closing thing I would leave you with is you hear a lot about ESG, and not everybody's that into that. But if you really think about it, if you think about what Bitcoin does for the environment in terms of bootstrapping clean and green energy and increasing our ability to bring on all this new green energy infrastructure to take advantage of baseload power like geothermal, nuclear, hydro. And if you think about the way that it's out there, giving people financial freedom, giving people property rights in places where no one else is going. And if you think about the way that at the governance level, it's not corruptible. I mean, 21 million, it is going to be the same rules for everybody, regardless of how rich you are, where you come from. I think it's the best ESG asset in the world. It's not even close. It's just a question of when do people start to understand that? I know most of you guys here are ahead of the curve, but I just wanted to say, if you're involved in this, if you're involved in Bitcoin, you should feel really good about that. And you should keep going, keep investing, keep expanding other people's access to Bitcoin. It's a really amazing thing for the world. So thanks again for having me. Take care.